Hello everybody, welcome back to this series where we will be discussing and analyzing part 3 of the Phantom Menace. If this is the first video you're watching from this channel, I suggest you go watch part 1 and 2 of this series so you can get caught up. After the conversation in Palpatine's apartment, we get our first look at the Jedi Temple, which looks like a combination of the Templo Mayor of Aztec architecture and the minaret towers of Islamic architecture. Inside the temple, we see Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan talking to the Jedi Council. They address that they may have encountered a Sith Lord on Tatooine. On the left, we see Ki-Adi-Mundi say, "Impossible, the Sith have been extinct for a millennium," which is about 1,000 years. Mace Windu then adds that he doesn't believe the Sith could have returned without them, the Jedi, knowing. But Yoda refutes by saying, "Hard to see the dark side is." We can infer that the dark side of the Force can be very cunning and not easy to identify. Mace Windu tells them that they will use all their resources to unravel the mystery of the attacker, and says, "May the Force be with you." But Qui-Gon doesn't leave and tells them that he has encountered a virgins in the Force, and adds that his cells have the highest concentration of midichlorians he has seen in a life form, and makes the assumption that he was conceived by the midichlorians. Windu mentions the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. Qui-Gon tries to stay neutral, but Yoda and the Council know that his opinion, which is that Anakin is the chosen one, has been revealed. Qui-Gon then requests the boy to be tested and that finding him was the will of the Force. They all look at each other and Mace tells him to bring Anakin to them. As you can see in this scene, Qui-Gon is very optimistic about Anakin and that he can be the one that will bring balance to the Force, while the Council are very hesitant about Anakin and feel suspicious about the situation in the sense that there's something extremely unusual happening, and that this could create potential danger in the future. We cut to Anakin trying to visit Padme. They send him in and tell him that Padme is not there and is instead met with the Queen, who is Padme, but has to switch roles with one of her handmaidens to hide her true identity in order to protect herself. He tells the Queen that he is on his way to the Jedi Temple and that he came to say goodbye, since he believes he'll start training and might not see her again. The Queen tells him that she'll relay the message to her. We cut to the Senate building, where we will see the hearing take place. Palpatine gives a briefing of the situation that has taken place, in which this whole conflict was started based on the taxation of trade routes. This is a reminder of the Trade Federation's motive, as they are upset about taxes being put on the trade routes. This parallels America's motivation to secede from the British Empire during the American Revolution, as America was upset about the high taxes that were set in place, which was a major factor in America's fight for independence. The Trade Federation objected to Palpatine's statement, lying to the Senate about them taking over Naboo. Queen Amidala walks up to state the allegations to the Senate, pretty much repeating what Palpatine said. The Trade Federation interrupt and state that there is no proof and ask for a commission be sent to ascertain the truth, meaning they want an investigation so there's conclusive evidence. The Congress of Malastare speaks in agreement with the Trade Federation. As the Chancellor discusses with his advisors about the matter, Palpatine attempts to manipulate Amidala by telling her that the bureaucrats are the ones really in charge and bring corruption in the Senate, by mentioning to her that they are on the payroll of the Trade Federation, and because of this, Chancellor Valorum's strength as a leader will disappear. After their discussion, the Chancellor asks if she'll defer her motion to allow a commission to explore the validity of her accusations, but she will not defer, and states that she needs immediate action since her people are suffering and dying, and concludes that if the Senate can't be proactive and help her situation, then new leadership is needed. Once she says that, we see Palpatine look up with a subtle smile, knowing that he was able to get to her and get what he wanted. Amidala then states that she moves for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's leadership. Once she says that, the whole room erupts, and we hear chants that say, "Vote now, vote now." In addition, we get a little Easter egg of the ET species right here on the bottom left. For those who don't know, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas are like best friends, so I think George incorporating ETs in the film was just to make Spielberg get a kick out of it. We see Palpatine further manipulate the Queen by reassuring her that she made the right decision and that a strong Chancellor will take over and stop the Trade Federation. But of course, when he says this, he's referring to himself. We cut to Obi-Wan talking with Qui-Gon and stating his doubts about Anakin and how he won't pass the Council's test because he's too old. Qui-Gon replies to this statement by telling him that Anakin will become a Jedi regardless of what the Council might say. Obi-Wan then states, out of annoyance, "Do not defy the Council, Master, not again," and further notes that if he were to just follow the code, he'll be on the Council. Qui-Gon puts his hand on his shoulder and tells him that he still has much to learn. This right here is kind of abstract and leaves the audience wondering, what does he mean by that? Or what does Obi-Wan need to learn? This gets answered not necessarily explicitly in the movies, but implicitly. The further along we go in the saga, the more we see of what Qui-Gon really is trying to get at, in that the Jedi are not about following a specific code, but about moving through the will of the Force, prioritizing compassion, diplomacy, and only fighting out of self-defense and or defense of innocent beings. That is what makes up a true Jedi. We cut to Anakin being tested by the Council. Very interesting on how they test him, which is basically him naming all the objects that pop up on the Jedi testing screen. I think it tests his Force sensibility by having it to where he's able to sense what's on the screen rather than just guessing. Once he's able to pass the test, Yoda asks how he feels. Anakin replies that he feels cold. Yoda then asks if he's afraid. In this shot, you can see other Jedi Masters involved. On the far right, you have Plo Koon. On the left, you have Ki-Adi-Mundi, Saesee Tiin, and Yaddle on the very far left of the screen. And then, of course, you have the two primary members in Yoda and Mace Windu. Anyway, Anakin replies no to Yoda about him being afraid, but Yoda isn't fooled. Ki-Adi-Mundi points out that his thoughts dwell on his mother. Anakin adds that he misses her. Yoda then asks if he's afraid to lose her. Anakin then goes, "What does that got to do with anything?" Yoda replies, "Everything," and we get a nice lecture from Yoda saying, "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering." Which really sums up and foreshadows Anakin's fall to the dark side. Yoda sighs and says, "I sense much fear in you." So Yoda was skeptical of Anakin from the beginning. However, I believe if they accepted him with open arms instead of skepticism, things might have turned out differently for Anakin. This transition into the next scene I think is beautifully well done and shows off more of the environment of the planet, and we get a nice cinematography moment. Take a look. Really nice and beautiful shots of Coruscant, and can't forget the music too. Really breathtaking. We see Amidala and Jar Jar together worrying about the situation taking place on Naboo. Jar Jar tells her that the Gungans don't die without a fight and that they have a grand army. This sparks an idea that Amidala creates, which causes her to go back to Naboo. We will see this unfold later on in the movie, and we'll discuss it in detail when we get to it. Captain Panaka and Palpatine walk into the scene, and Panaka announces that Palpatine has been nominated to succeed Valorum as Supreme Chancellor. Palpatine says, "A surprise to be sure, but a welcome one." But we know this is all part of the plan, and everything seems to go his way. He then promises to put an end to corruption if he's elected. Amidala asks who else has been nominated. Captain Panaga states the nominees, who are Balin Teles of Alderaan and Ailey Team of Malastare. Then Palpatine says, "I feel confident our situation will create a strong sympathy vote for us." This line, right here, tells you the whole reason why the Trade Federation and Sidious go after specifically Naboo. And it's because Palpatine, aka Sidious, is trying to create turmoil on his home planet to create a situation where the Senate will sympathize with him and vote for him to be the new leader. The whole strategy Sidious is playing at is that the more the conflict escalates, the more the Senate will sympathize with him, which means the higher chance there is for the Senate to remove Valorum from Chancellor and him taking over his place. That's why they're attacking Naboo and not Coruscant or other planets for that matter. Sidious is an evil mastermind, and his plan to become Chancellor is working. Anyway, Amidala fears that by the time he has control of the bureaucrats, there'll be nothing left of their people and their way of life. She adds that she's decided to go back to Naboo. Palpatine gets up and shows concern and notes that if she goes back, they'll force her to sign the treaty. But she stays headstrong and responds to Palpatine saying, I'll sign no treaty. She then adds, "It is clear to me now that the Republic no longer functions. I pray you will bring sanity and compassion back to the Senate." This depicts Amidala's fears and doubts of the Republic, as she fears that the Republic is crumbling as it has become more and more corrupt and the system has become very inefficient. As Amidala leaves the scene, we see Palpatine's cunning look. We return to the temple and see Anakin, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan, waiting to see if Anakin will be trained. But Mace Windu says, no, he will not be trained. And you see the look of disdain on Anakin's face. Mace adds that he's too old. Qui-Gon refutes by saying, "He is the chosen one, you must see it." Yoda looks into the Force and says, "Clouded this boy's future is." Qui-Gon steps up and says, "I will train him then." Yoda and Mace tell him that he already has a Padawan in Obi-Wan and that the code forbids him to take on a second. Qui-Gon tells them that Obi-Wan is ready. Then Obi-Wan chimes in acknowledgement and says, "I am ready to face the trials." But Yoda tells him that the council will decide on who is ready. Qui-Gon then gives Obi-Wan words of affirmation, saying that he's headstrong and that there's little more he can learn from him. Mace Windu says, "Now is not the time for this," and tells them that the Senate is voting for a new Supreme Chancellor and Queen Amidala is returning to Naboo, and adds that this would put pressure on the Federation and widen the confrontation. Ki-Adi-Mundi adds that this would draw out the Queen's attacker. Mace tells them to go with her to Naboo and discover the identity of the Dark Warrior. They say, "May the Force be with you," and they leave the scene. Obi-Wan tries to reason with Qui-Gon and tells him that Anakin is dangerous and that the Council senses it and wants to know why he can't accept their conclusion. But Qui-Gon tells him that Anakin's fate is uncertain and that he's not dangerous and that there's still debate on his future, and then tells him to get on board. As Obi-Wan leaves, Anakin walks up to Qui-Gon and tells him that he doesn't want to be a problem. Qui-Gon says confidently that he won't be. He then tells him that he's not allowed to train him, therefore he wants Anakin to watch him and be mindful. In addition, he tells him to stay close and he'll be safe. And then we get our introduction to the Midichlorians and what they are. In the previous video, we talked a little bit about Midichlorians and how they are used to determine a Force user's potential. The higher the Midichlorian count, the more powerful they potentially will be in the Force. But here is where we can dig a little deeper and get a better understanding of what they really are. Let's take a look at what Qui-Gon says and we'll go from there.
I've been wondering, what are midichlorians?
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside your cells, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage. Without the midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force.
Okay, now if you still don't understand, then let's take a minute to break it down. So he says, midichlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells. I think this line is pretty self-explanatory. Then he says, and we are symbionts with them, meaning that the Jedi and the midichlorians coexist with one another for a mutual advantage. He goes on to say, without the midichlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force. They continually speak to us, telling us the will of the Force. This is where we get a distinction between the Force and midichlorians. Midichlorians are not the Force. They are microscopic organisms that act as messengers for the Force to the Force users, who are primarily the Jedi and the Sith. In essence, the midichlorians are a slightly fantasy version of a real thing. When he says they're telling us the will of the Force, it's not that different from actual mitochondria giving your cells directions based on signals that they're getting from hormones. To sum it up as an analogy, the Force is the hormones and the midichlorians are the mitochondria. If you want to learn more about midichlorians in further detail, I suggest you check out this video called What Are the Wills? How to Watch Star Wars Part 1.1 by Rick Worley. He does a really good job explaining what they are in full detail and explores the concept even further when he goes into talking about the wills, which is something that George Lucas originally planned out for the saga. So go watch it, and I hope you come out of that video enlightened by Star Wars knowledge. The Queen arrives and they head off to Naboo. We get a nice nighttime shot of Theed. We see the Neimoidians address the situation that has taken place and that they have fully taken over the planet, meaning they've taken over the Gungans too, not just the beings on the surface. Sidious says, "Good. I will see to it that in the Senate things stay as they are," giving the viewer more hints that he is the puppeteer in this mass conflict. He then tells them that he's sending Darth Maul to join them. The Neimoidians look at each other, worried about the fact that a Sith will be in their presence. We see Anakin and the pilot going over the different controls that are in the cockpit, and the pilot's very impressed with the amount of knowledge Anakin has when naming all the controls. We see Amidala listening to ideas of what they're going to do once they arrive on Naboo. In the previous video, we discussed a little bit about the importance of color. Here we see Amidala wearing purple, which represents royalty, and Lucas seems to use the color purple with his political characters. Either them wearing the color purple or they're in an environment surrounded by some form of purple. Purple is obviously a combination of red and blue, which in this series represents good and evil. So what Lucas is showing us is that political power isn't inherently good or bad, it's what they do with it that matters. This is only one character we see so far wearing purple, but as the series goes on, we will see more of that play out, especially in Revenge of the Sith. Qui-Gon and Panaka worry that this plan to come back will fail and that they have no army to face against the droids. But Amidala calls out Jar Jar and asks for help. This is the reason she chose to come back, because Jar Jar gave her the idea to unite their forces to fight against the Federation, and we see more of that plan being laid out later on in the film. The pilot detects a battleship, but Obi-Wan corrects him, saying it's a droid control ship. Critics try to point out that there should be a blockade upon their arrival. However, I would argue that the Trade Federation accomplished their goal in taking over the planet and landed their ships and troops onto the planet. In addition, when the Jedi and the Queen were leaving the planet, the Federation didn't know the Queen was on board. But now that the ship is back, the same ship as before, the Federation wouldn't want to destroy the ship because their goal is to capture the Queen and force her to sign the treaty. Also, since they were able to detect the control ship, it's more than likely the control ship spotted them, as Panaka was able to point out. So if they were to attack the ship, they'll run the risk of destroying the Queen, which is something they don't want to do. They want her alive, obviously. So if you really think about it, it makes more sense for them to attack them on ground rather than in space. Once they land, Obi-Wan walks up to Qui-Gon and tells him that Jar Jar is on his way to Gungan City. He then apologizes to him about his behavior towards Anakin's situation and is grateful that he thinks he's ready to take on the trials. Qui-Gon smiles and tells him that he's been a good apprentice and that he foresees him becoming a great Jedi Knight. Jar Jar comes back and lets them know that nobody was there. Obi-Wan wonders if they've been taken to the camps, but Jar Jar says he doesn't think so, and that when in trouble, they go to their sacred place and he takes them there. Here's what it looks like. Boss Nass walks up to meet the people who have come before him. Queen addresses herself and lets him know that they've come in peace, but Boss Nass still has some disdain for them. But before the Queen properly replies, Padme steps up and announces herself as the real Queen and explains that the one he's been speaking to is a decoy and that she did this for her protection. As she does this, Qui-Gon looks at Obi-Wan in amusement, as they knew all along that Padme was the real Queen. Padme then points out that even though their societies haven't always agreed, they've been able to live in peace. In addition, she points out that they have a common enemy in the Trade Federation. She goes down on her knees and begs for their help, and we see everybody else bow down. This again shows Padme's humility and how she's willing to put differences aside for a better cause. Boss Nass is impressed and accepts her request. Padme is pleased, Qui-Gon is pleased, and we see the Gungans in the back pleased. This is a perfect example of the proverb, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." We cut to Sidious asking for more reports on the situation. Neimoidians tell him that they've located the starship in the swamp. Sidious says that this is an unexpected move for her and that it's too aggressive, and tells Maul to be mindful and to let them make the first move. We cut back to the good guys and we see the Gungans looking out for the Naboo guards to arrive. They report to Anakin that they've arrived, and he goes off to tell Padme and the others. Boss Nass praises Jar Jar and promotes him to general. Padme, Panaka, and the Jedi discuss the plan to take down the Federation. Padme asks about the current situation. Panaka answers her by saying, "Almost everyone's in camps. A few hundred police and guards have formed an underground resistance movement. I brought back as many leaders as I could." Here we see that there has been an effort to fight against the Federation while the Queen was gone, but Panaka adds that the army is much larger and stronger than they had thought. Panaka looks directly at Padme and tells her that he doesn't think this is a battle that they can win. Padme responds by saying that the battle is a diversion and that the Gungans must draw the droid army away from the cities. This is why the idea for her to make an alliance with the Gungans was so important. Anyway, R2 displays a visual map of what the plan would look like. Padme continues by saying that they can enter the city by using the secret passages on the waterfall side, and once they get to the main entrance, Captain Panaka will create a diversion, which will help her and the rest of the group to enter the palace and capture the Viceroy. She then adds that without the Viceroy, they will be lost. Qui-Gon tells her that it's a good plan, but he also points out that with this diversion, many Gungans will be killed, but Boss Nass tells them that they are ready to do their part. Padme adds that they'll send pilots to destroy the control ship orbiting the planet. Qui-Gon tells her that there is great risk, which is that the weapons on their fighters may not penetrate their shields. Obi-Wan chimes in and says, "If the Viceroy escapes, Your Highness, he will return with another droid army." Padme responds by saying, "Well, that is why we must not fail to get the Viceroy. Everything depends on it." We cut to Sidious talking with the Neimoidians and Maul, and the first thing he says is that Padme is more foolish than he thought, as we can see that they know about the Gungan army and are setting everything up to meet them. They ask Sidious for permission to proceed, and Sidious says, "Wipe them out. All of them." We cut to the Gungans preparing their army. This shot right here is an homage to Kurosawa's Throne of Blood. Here's what it looks like. Pretty neat stuff. We see the full scope of the Gungan army. The things that are on the back of the dinosaur-looking animals are the shield generators. Once they settle on land, they start up the shield. The droid army arrives and starts to attack first. We cut to the Jedi and the Queen trying to get inside the palace. Padme signals to Panaka and Panaka signals back. Qui-Gon tells Anakin that once they get inside, he wants him to find a safe place to hide. I think it would have been much safer for Anakin to stay on Coruscant, but I think he came along because Qui-Gon wanted him to watch and learn. Just like how you would watch someone do something and you learn that way. But I think in this scenario, it's not worth the risk, but you gotta find some way to make Anakin the hero. It's not the most logical, but it still works well. The guards fire a surprise attack, and the battle begins. You'll notice the green and red lasers shooting out. In the original trilogy, we see the Empire shoot green with their TIE fighters. Here we see the Naboo use green and the droids use red. The green here is used to reflect the Republic, as Naboo is part of the Republic, which parallels the Empire, as the Empire is the one who uses the green lasers. So a very subtle foreshadowing of what's to come for the Republic. They sneak into the building. The Neimoidians watch over the battle and realize that the battle is taking place too close to them. They are met with more battle droids once they've reached inside. Qui-Gon tells Anakin to find cover. Padme tells the pilots to get to their ships. The pilots take off. R2 gets put into a ship. We see the decoy queen kicking ass. Anakin goes into the cockpit for cover, and unfortunately we see one of the droid tanks shoot down one of the Naboo starfighters. We see the rest of the Naboo starfighters attack the control ship, however they are met with resistance when the droid starfighters show up. We cut to the command droid telling its troops to cease fire. Jar Jar tells his troops to be steady. We see the droid infantry being released from what is called a multi-troop transport, MTT. We cut to the control ship as one of the Neimoidians starts to activate the droids, and we see them on the ground being activated. They march towards the shield and are able to move through it. We see electric balloons being fired by the Gungan army, and it does some damage. That is definitely an unorthodox weapon, but it is effective. I think Lucas is trying to reflect the real world, where the people who don't have or are not accustomed to high-tech weaponry use unorthodox tactics in order to fight against their opponent. Just like how the Viet Cong were able to hold their ground and defeat the US military. This is also shown in Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks and their ability to take down the Empire. We cut to Padme telling her troops that the Viceroy is most likely in the throne room as they make their way over there. Anakin stands up and says, "Wait for me," but Qui-Gon tells him to stay in the cockpit. As they are walking, they are met with an unexpected visitor.
We'll handle this.
We'll take the long way.
Yeah, that introduction to Maul is pretty badass. One of the most badass scenes in all of Star Wars, I feel. Just the music and Maul's sinister look, it's just perfect. Anyway, R2 notices Droideka is approaching. They start firing at the guards. Anakin says, "We gotta do something, R2." Then it cuts to Maul and his double-bladed red lightsaber, and in response, the Jedi ignite their weapons, and we get into a full-on lightsaber battle. Meanwhile, we see Padme and the guards struggle against the droidekas. Anakin starts to push the wrong buttons as he's trying to find the trigger, and instead lifts off the ground. However, he does eventually find the trigger and is able to destroy the droidekas. Padme uses this to her advantage and advances onward, while Anakin is at a point of no return and takes off to join the rest of the crew in space. Critics say Anakin is wearing a child-sized helmet, when in actuality, he isn't. I'll give you a comparison. If you look at these two shots, you'll see that the helmet the man is wearing on the right is almost squished against his face. Okay, it has a very narrow shape. And on the left, you see that the helmet looks wide on Anakin's head. I think here I've shown enough to put that criticism to bed. The next part we see the Jedi and Maul fight. I'm going to play you a clip of the first portion because it's too good to not show it. Whether you like this movie or not, you have to admit this fight scene is pretty badass. As Padme and her guards continue on, they are met with more droids. We cut to Anakin's point of view of seeing the control ship. Jar Jar's clumsiness helps him out when battling the droids. In this whole battle of Jar Jar fighting against the droids, George gives homage to Buster Keaton. And as we see Jar Jar during this battle, I'll give you a side-by-side look at how Jar Jar parallels Buster Keaton. Pretty neat, huh? While that's happening, we see another Naboo starfighter get shot down. Anakin sees a bunch of droid starfighters in his sight and goes, "This is tense." I know during this sequence, Anakin is a little too excited and not really worried about the deadly consequences. But again, this is where these movies are meant for kids. If a kid were to see another kid worrying about death and is always panicking, then it would make the kid who's watching the movie feel pretty uncomfortable and would get too scared. When kids watch movies, they almost take it quite literally and try to relate to the characters as much as possible, more than adults. And if you are a 9 to 10 year old boy watching another 9 to 10 year old boy, you're going to try to relate to Anakin as if you are him. So having Anakin being lighthearted, especially in this part, is for kids who are watching the movie to think more adventure and excitement rather than death and pain when it comes to Anakin's character. In addition, the characters of Star Wars revolve around archetypes. Anakin, like I said in the first video of the series, plays the archetype of the innocent. One of the characteristics of the innocent is that they're optimistic joy chasers. Another one is that they take foolish risks. This is a prime example of that. Anakin is taking a foolish risk, but he clearly doesn't see it that way. He sees it as an exciting adventure. We get one of Anakin's famous lines, "I'll try spinning, that's a good trick." His spinning was able to make the droid starfighters miss. We cut to Panaka playing it smart by destroying the window. They use this as an opportunity to escape and prepare their ascension guns. While they prepare, we see a few guards giving them cover. Once they've reached the upper section, they run towards the throne room. We see them continue their fight. Obi-Wan gets kicked in the face, which causes him to fly off the upper platform and land on the one below. Qui-Gon punches Maul and causes him to fly off the platform. Qui-Gon drops down to meet Maul, but Maul kicks him and is able to regain his feet. And now, it's just Maul and Qui-Gon battling it out. Obi-Wan jumps back up and tries to catch up to them. As Maul and Qui-Gon fight, they are then met with ray shields and are forced to be separated. I really like what happens while they wait because you'll see the difference in attitudes between Qui-Gon and Maul. Here, take a look. You can just see Maul's eyes staring down at his prey, while Qui-Gon takes a knee and tries to embody the Force and let the Force be his guide. This scene does a really good job of showing the duality between the Jedi and the Sith. The droids destroy the shield generator and the Gungans are forced to retreat. In this next sequence we see quite a bit of Jar Jar. In addition, I would like to show how this sequence compares with other scenes from different movies. George Lucas loves to quote or pay homage to other films in the past. This right here is a good example, but before I play the clip, again, I want to give a quick shout out to Rick Worley. He did a video a few years back about how Star Wars quotes other movies. I referenced that video for what I'm about to show you. Here it is. The man on the left is, again, Buster Keaton. To give you a little bit of information about him, he was famous for directing and acting in silent physical comedy films, very similar to Charlie Chaplin. His over-the-top expressions and stunts were part of the inspiration for Jar Jar. In addition, Jar Jar was also influenced by Disney's Goofy. We see Padme and her troops being forced to surrender as they are surrounded by droids. We cut to Anakin being attacked by droid starfighters. He gets hit, which leads him to go inside the control ship. Once he lands inside, he is then met with droids. We cut back to the lightsaber fight, still staring down at Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan ignites his lightsaber, and once the shields open, Qui-Gon and Maul clash. Obi-Wan waits, and once his shields open up, he sprints to try and meet them, but barely doesn't make it as he is met with the last shield door. Now, a lot of people will say that this is plot armor, and I tend to agree, but there is an argument that can be made as to why Obi-Wan doesn't use force speed. In the other Star Wars films, we have seen Luke use the Force, and they get tired as he tried to lift the X-Wing. With that in mind, we can infer that using the Force takes lots of energy, and Obi-Wan ran the way he did to not just preserve his energy, but also he might have felt it was unnecessary because he thought he would make it in time. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and now he is stuck having to watch his master face his impending doom. And once Maul kills Qui-Gon, he turns back and looks at Obi-Wan, and you can see it in his eyes as if they're saying, "You're next." We get a dramatic tone shift as everything seems to be going wrong for the good guys. Padme and her troops are taken to Gunray. Gunray tells them that their insurrection is at an end. And when it looks like the Federation have won, the decoy shows up and saves the day. They go after her instead because they believe she's the real queen, not Padme. This throws the Neimoidians off guard, and Padme is able to open a secret latch beside her chair that contains blasters. She's able to use them to her advantage and destroys the droids, and is able to confront the Neimoidians and discuss a new treaty. We cut back to what is now Obi-Wan versus Maul, and this fight sequence right here is probably one of the best, if not the best fighting sequence in all of Star Wars. Take a look. I mean, can't get any better than that, really. We cut to Anakin and we see the ship be able to regain power. He starts the shields and attacks the droids, as well as using proton torpedoes to destroy the main reactor, as the captain of the control ship states to their fellow Neimoidian. And they react by saying, "Impossible, nothing can get through our shields." Fortunately, a 9-year-old boy was able to do it. Anakin then starts his engines and takes off. As he's heading out of the control ship, we see the ship blowing up from the inside. Anakin is able to escape the explosions, and we see the control ship completely destroyed. We see the droids start to deactivate, and I want to make a note here. As you can see on the back of this droid, it spells out 1138, which is an homage to Lucas's first feature film, THX 1138. The Gungans rejoice as they have won the battle. We cut back to Obi-Wan and Maul, as we see Maul taunting Obi-Wan as he swings his lightsaber back and forth. Obi-Wan notices Qui-Gon's lightsaber. Maul seems to sense his own doom. Obi-Wan leaps up into the air as he pulls the lightsaber into his hand and cuts Maul in half once he lands. And we see the half of Maul fall down into the abyss. Obi-Wan runs to Qui-Gon, and as Qui-Gon dies, he asks Obi-Wan to train the boy, meaning Anakin, of course, and tells him that he is the chosen one. This is why this fight is probably the most important fight of all of Star Wars, because it is about the fate of Anakin, which is why the music that is playing during the fight is called Duel of the Fates. If Qui-Gon were to come out alive, he would have been the one who would properly train Anakin, because he's the one who took the time to get to know Anakin and was the only one who understood Anakin and believed in him, whereas the other Jedi were too worried about his future and saw him more as a threat to the galaxy instead of the one who will bring balance to the Force, like how Qui-Gon did. Anakin would have looked up to Qui-Gon as a father figure, and Qui-Gon would have fulfilled that role and trained Anakin the right way. Qui-Gon embodies what a true Jedi is, which is to lead with compassion and only fight when necessary, and let the Force be your guide for the sole purpose of knowledge and wisdom. As the series goes on, you will gradually start to notice what the Jedi do wrong and how the over-reliance of the Jedi Code was a big part of their downfall. Time goes by, and we see the leaders of the Trade Federation being confronted and are being told to go back to the Senate, and Captain Panaka escorts them to a ship that will take them there. We see Palpatine congratulating Obi-Wan on his bravery, and then looks at Anakin and says, "We will watch your career with great interest." Queen Padme Amidala congratulates Palpatine on winning the election. He tries to be modest and gives kudos to her and tells her that her boldness is what saved the people, that it should be her that deserves to be congratulated. Palpatine adds, "Together we shall bring peace and prosperity to the Republic." We cut to Yoda and Obi-Wan discussing the future for Anakin, as well as Obi-Wan's rank to level up to Jedi Knight. Yoda at first is having a hard time accepting Anakin being Obi-Wan's Padawan. He states, "The chosen one, the boy may be. Nevertheless, grave danger I fear in his training." Obi-Wan replies, "Master Yoda, I gave Qui-Gon my word. I will train Anakin, without the approval of the Council if I must." Yoda replies, "Qui-Gon's defiance I sense in you. Need that you do not." Yoda takes a breath and states, "Agree with you, the Council does. Your apprentice, Skywalker, will be." We then cut to Qui-Gon's funeral. Anakin turns to Obi-Wan and asks, "What will happen to me now?" Obi-Wan tells him that he was granted permission to train him to become a Jedi. Yoda and Mace discuss the Sith. Yoda says, "Always two there are. No more, no less. A master and an apprentice." However, Mace replies, "But which was destroyed, the master or the apprentice?" And we see the camera pan right towards Palpatine, which gives us another visual hint that he is Sidious. We cut to the parade, and we see the people of Naboo and the Gungans celebrating. You see the design of the buildings. They look a lot like Roman architecture, which is symbolizing the Roman Empire. We see the Gungans march to meet Amidala. Amidala gives Boss Nass an energy ball as a symbol for peace and unity between the two societies. We get a close-up of Anakin, Padme, R2, and Obi-Wan. and we see the last shot of Boss Nass holding the energy ball high in the air. Before we end the video, we need to answer one question. Why is this movie called The Phantom Menace? This last sequence can give us an answer. Pay attention to the music that's playing. Does it sound familiar in any way? Let me play you another clip and maybe it'll start ringing some bells. Now, if you are still confused, I'm going to combine these two tracks and you'll start to see how similar they really are. What's happening here is that the parade song is the Emperor's theme song played in a major key instead of a minor key as the Emperor's theme song is normally played. The whole idea here is that what's happening on the surface is that they're celebrating two societies coming together after taking back their planet from the Trade Federation. However, what's happening underneath the surface, which is what's really happening, is that they're celebrating their impending doom at the hands of a Sith Lord, the man who has now been elected Chancellor, their future Emperor, the true Phantom Menace. That is the end of The Phantom Menace. I hope you enjoyed it. More videos are on the way, including the next commentary series where we will be going over Attack of the Clones. Make sure to subscribe, hit like, and leave a comment, and may the Force be with you.